Hey, welcome back into another edition of First Draft. Something different and fun today. It is officially the day that my rankings have dropped on ESPN.com. I'm Field Yates, joined by Jordan Reid. Matt Miller, not with us this time. He's coming back soon. But Jordan, the moment that you've been waiting for so
Let's
long,
go.
I'm sure,
Let's
to rip
go.
my rankings apart has finally arrived. I mean, when you think about the things that you're thankful for this time of the year, as we're coming off of Thanksgiving, of course, a great week, this has to be the thing you're most thankful for, right?
Oh, I was looking forward to it. As I was eating the turkey, I was eating the stuffing and the dressing. Yeah. I was looking forward to your rankings, of course, to rip them apart.
Okay, you have your two wonderful daughters, your wife, and nothing gives you more joy than the opportunity to talk rankings here with me. So for those that haven't seen them, it's available right now on ESPN.com in full. It's 5 players by position. You've got everything from quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, fullbacks. 3 fullbacks, excuse me. We're going to go a little lighter there. Offensive linemen, you guys know the full gamut. It is all available right now on ESPN.com. And Jordan, before we actually dive into it, I just wanted to say quickly, and this is not to say that if you disagree with my take, I am looking for the excuse or the out card here. I am just mentioning to people, as a reminder, these rankings are fluid. They're dynamic, right? In the cases of some players who play on teams that are not bowl eligible, their seasons are over. There's no more college film left for them to put on tape. In the case of many of the players that are at the top of the draft board, there is at least one more game, whether it's a conference championship game, a bowl game, maybe 1 or 2 playoff games. Plus, we have the whole postseason process. You've got the All-Star games, you've got the Combine, Pro Days, everything in between. So what you see now is not going to hold all the way through until April, but it's a good starting point here, Jordan. So what I decided to do was hand you my rankings in advance of America and let you sort of figure out some players that came to mind for one reason or another. And it's only natural for us to start at quarterback. So you, the former quarterback, get to grill me and what stood out on my 1 through 5 quarterback rankings that read as such: Caleb Williams, Drake May, Shedeur Sanders, Jaden Daniels from LSU, and J.J. McCarthy from Michigan.
That 4 and 5 spot, Jaden Daniels as well as J.J. McCarthy. We have some more film now on J.J. Everybody was looking forward to the Penn State game, of course. We know what happened in that, and then the big game against Ohio State. So what kind of differentiated that tier for you between Jaden Daniels, of course, Shedeur at 3? We don't know what his decision is going to be, and then J.J. at 5.
Yeah, I almost wonder if, I thought about not including Shedeur because there just seems to be so much momentum towards him returning to Colorado for at least for another season, I should say, Jordan. But here is where I settled with Jaden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy. And you can ask our editors this. This was the only change in terms of prospect rankings that I made from the time that I submitted the file until the time that it went live online. I said, can you please flip Jaden Daniels with J.J. McCarthy? And here's the thought process behind it. Jaden Daniels, who I hope is invited to New York City to be one of the Heisman finalists. I don't have a vote. If I did, he'd certainly be at the top or very close to the top of my ballot. Has done as much as one possibly can during the course of this season to improve his draft stock. We've all talked about how for a guy who's got a lot of experience, he's actually gotten a lot better this year than he had in his prior seasons, and they have certainly tons of weapons down there at LSU. But the dynamic playmaking, which they've really needed, Jordan, because of how bad their defense has been, is indisputable. With J.J. McCarthy, and this is not his fault, he has played perfectly well within the system that Michigan has, and because they're so suffocating on defense, the number 1 defense in the country, they haven't needed a bunch of blockbuster offensive days. So where I decided was this. Based off what I've seen this year, Jaden Daniels has put on more impressive, consistent film than J.J. McCarthy, who in those 2 big games against Ohio State and Penn State did enough to help them win, no doubt about that. Penn State, it was a total of 7 completions, and then in Ohio State, it was not entirely, but a lot of the Blake Corum show. So I feel like J.J. McCarthy, with the real shot, in my estimation, to have 3 more college games. First, Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, and then I think they'll be, certainly one of the top 2 teams in the college football playoff if they win this upcoming Saturday. There's a real chance he's playing 3 more games, 2 of which would be against top-tier opponents, that J.J. McCarthy could easily be quarterback 3 by the next time my rankings are updated if we know that Shedeur Sanders is out. It's just the traits that I love for J.J., the sincere ball placement, the mobility that we did see against Ohio State, moving on the run, not just as a runner, but also as a thrower, orchestrating an offense magnificently. We just haven't seen as much of it against high-level opponents as we have seen from Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, this J.J. McCarthy situation is fascinating to me because we're both hearing the same things. People like him in the first round. Some people more so like him on day 2. And he's quarterback 5 for me currently as well. And I went ahead and made the switch with Jaden Daniels, flipping those two guys as well. So we see it very similarly. But I think with J.J. having potentially more games down the backstretch of the year, assuming they go into the college football playoff, I think that may push him over Jaden Daniels for some people. It's just interesting to me that he's going to have more games to essentially prove himself, especially in the college football playoff where he did not play well at all last year. So if let's say he plays well in the college football playoff, they let him throw the ball 25, 30 times a game. Would he end up leapfrogging Jaden Daniels just because he's going to play more games?
I think he has the best chance to move up the board of maybe any player in the entire draft, but certainly amongst the quarterbacks for the remainder of this college football season. Because if Michigan, and I expect them to, sorry to our Iowa fan listeners, hold serve pretty handily on Saturday, and it might be the same formula that's worked for them for much of this year, just bludgeon teams, right? But if they play, if they play Oklahoma or Texas, or if they play Washington, and if they play Washington, that might be the game that could really start the momentum. Because you're not beating Washington 16-13, right? If you're beating Washington, it's because you're hanging 35. I know that, Wazoo gave Washington all it could handle, and it's been a little bit of a tougher go offensively in relative terms for Washington. But whether it's Washington or whether it's Oregon, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida State, whoever it is, you're probably going to have to hang some serious offensive output on those teams. And then with JJ, the other thing is that I know that this is an unfair thing because it's not his choice who he plays with, but the questions that JJ is going to have the chance to answer is, what does it look like when there's not, close to an entirely draftable offensive line around him? Maybe a top 3 running back in the country behind him, a draftable wide receiver in Roman Wilson. I mean, it's just littered with NFL talent in Michigan that it's not his fault that he's just doing his job within the system and they're playing and succeeding the way that they are. But if Michigan needs him more than it has needed him up to this point of the season against one of those high-flying teams, JJ's got the chance to really put his stamp down as potentially QB3 in this class. And you and I both know this, Jordan. I don't care where we have them ranked on our big board. QB3 is going higher than people expect. Yeah. It's just, except for the 2022 draft, the Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis draft, quarterbacks go a whole lot higher than people expect.
It happens. I mean, it happens every single year, but I love Jaden Daniels, man. Like, just watching this film, he just continuously gets better and better every single week, and I get it. The frame is slight. Yep. He had some problems at Arizona State as far as, on the field and seeing the field cleanly and pocket patience and things like that, but he's playing at a supremely high level right now, and his evaluation is just so clean to me this year. So he's my quarterback 3. Like, even if Shedeur does come out, I like Jaden Daniels even better. Like, I like him that much. And I've kind of turned the page already on Shedeur Sanders. I just don't see him coming out this year. But I'm a big fan of Jaden Daniels. He's my quarterback 3.
And especially with Colorado's season being over, they're not bowl eligible. Oftentimes when a team is not bowl eligible, you kind of know what the guy's plans are, right? I mean, they've had multiple players who have announced or at least one I can recall, that have announced their transfer portal, right? Intentions, which obviously it's a busy time for that across the country, but you're starting to see that with the non-bowl eligible teams. So maybe we'll get a word on Shedeur one way or the other. Jaden, the stuff that stands out, though, for those that aren't as familiar, of the quarterbacks that we're talking about, he's the best dual threat runner, right? I mean, no one's going to be Lamar Jackson coming out of the draft, but this is the closest thing to microwavable offense as a runner and a thrower in the NFL, in the draft. I mean, he's so dynamic. You mentioned he's slight, but he doesn't take a ton of huge hits right now as an open field runner, right? He's got good vision and instincts to sort of avoid the massive collisions that would leave him susceptible. And I think the best part about him, you mentioned sort of the pocket patience being a problem in the past, is that there's a really fine line for these guys that are very athletic and knowing when to A, break the pocket, B, hang tight, and C, hang tight but not hang tight too long, right? And we've heard about a quarterback like Russell Wilson, who took a lot of sacks, sometimes of his own doing, right? Because he tries too hard to make the play last. I feel like Jaden really mastered that this year. Is like, when is it time to break free and when is it time to stand tall in the pocket and just let it rip? And when you've got, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas as your wide receivers at the top, and from what I hear, they just grow them on trees in LSU. They've got more coming, by the way, in the freshman class. When you've got 5 stars left and right, I don't blame you for letting it rip. Anything else on quarterback that stood out? I feel like at this point, Jordan, like whether they're the same order or not, like those 5 are kind of the names that you're hearing the most. But there's some pretty good depth here. Like it hurt to not have Bo Nix in that top 5 because as far as doing what you've been asked to do this year, I don't know that anybody has done as much as Bo Nix could do. The touchdown-interception ratio is off the charts, and that Oregon offense is sizzling, not just because of Bo Nix, but certainly with him as the primary driver.
Yeah, Bo Nix is one of those guys of where you don't really appreciate his game until you actually sit down and study him, just because his decision-making is so good. He's pinpoint accurate, and even though the Oregon offense is more east-west oriented, he does take some deep shots down the field. Him and Troy Franklin, they've developed a really good chemistry, and Franklin's going to be one of the top receivers in this draft class too, but Bo Nix's game is just so mature. And if you would have told me this was the same guy that was at Auburn, I would have laughed at you. Like he's a completely different player, similar to Jaden Daniels, but the transfer portal has really helped him. But one name I do want to mention, I don't think we see him this year at all, is Carson Beck at Georgia. Yeah. I've been blown away by his film. The sample size is small, only 10 starts to his credit so far, but his film is really, really good. Like I said, I don't think we see him this year, but if he does come out this year, don't be surprised if he's a name that definitely does rise. The film is really, really good with Beck. Yeah,
he certainly has. I mean, made a major mark this year. And I'm with you, though. Like, and again, you don't know. These things are, you have to be careful in saying anything definitively. But the vibes, if those matter, have been that he is likely to return for one more season, at least in Georgia. Let's go to running back. And I think this is probably the position where you're going to see the most names thrown around as top 5 players. Mine were as follows: Marshawn Lloyd from USC, Blake Corum from Michigan, Jonathan Brooks from Texas, who was my number 1 back, Jordan, until he tore his ACL just a couple of weeks ago, Braylon Allen from Wisconsin, and then Travion Henderson from Ohio State. What stood out to you there?
This is the position group that I've went back and forth the most outside of linebacker and running back. I'm about to pull my hair out trying to organize these guys. And I've went back and forth as far as who my top guy is, but I kind of went safe. I went Travion Henderson is my running back 1, and I see he's your running back 5. So is it more so just injuries that you're really concerned about with him?
I would say for Travion, it's probably a couple things here. Is that, like, I'll sort of take these guys one by one ahead of him, right? Jonathan Brooks, I just thought was as complete of any back in the entire country prior to the injury at Texas. So good as a receiver, on top of being like a really decisive runner, but also like has this sort of like unique ability to be north-south when he needs to be north-south, but also has some lateral agility that allowed him to make players miss, defenders miss in the hole. Blake Corum, I actually do think has the best lateral agility. Like, I'm not sure anybody breaks tackles more with like in the running lanes than Blake Corum, or makes defenders miss more than Blake Corum. He's just so shifty, and I get it. It's a great offensive line. He's playing behind, and I get it that I think that Fox flashed the stat on Saturday during the game. 19 of his first 20 rushing touchdowns were from within 5 yards this season. Yeah. But he did have that breakaway run against Ohio State, and the intangibles are off the chart for Blake Corum. Brooks, I just mentioned. Marshawn Lloyd, who I should have started with there at USC, transfer from South Carolina, who violent but decisive runner. Like, he's got this ability to, like, some runners just want to always hit the home run. He's got this ability to, like, add a little bit of width to the run when he needs to try to gain a few extra yards without just running right to the sideline and risking a negative yardage. He turns a lot of plays into positive yards, and I don't know that anybody is Isaiah Pacheco in this year's class in terms of just how physical and violent they run, but he runs pretty angry, does Marshawn Lloyd out there at USC. And then Braylon Allen, I mean, is there a worse fit for a player than Braylon Allen right now playing in that Wisconsin offense? For those who haven't watched much Wisconsin this year, they have become like what a lot of college football is, right? They spread things out. Mm-hmm. Quarterback plays almost exclusively from shotgun. But Braylon Allen he's an I-back, right? He's like the other Wisconsin running backs that you most remember, right? He is kind of like Jonathan Taylor in some ways. He's a power back. He's not going to do a lot of, left-right. He's not going to do a lot of east-west running. He just wants to take the football between the tackles and just
who he reminds me of?
Give it to me.
He reminds me of A.J. Dillon.
Yeah.
Remember, he was coming out of Boston College.
Sure.
He's very similar to A.J. Dillon. And we talk about scheme-specific runners a lot. I think his landing spot is going to make or break his career initially.
Totally.
Now, 2 landing spots I love, Tennessee and Dallas. I think he would be
there you
great in both of those systems. We know Derrick Henry's probably not going to be back next year. And then the Cowboys, they need that 1A type of runner to pair with Tony Pollard. So I just think landing spot is going to be so crucial to him and so vital. Now, he's not going to give you a whole bunch in the passing game. Wisconsin has tried to incorporate him in the passing game, but he's just not a receiving back. That's not really his game. You want him shoulder square to the line of scrimmage and just let him be a sledgehammer. Like, that's what his game is. That's why he was so good his first 2 years. And, he has good numbers this year, but running out of shotgun really ain't his thing. So if he can get an offense that just lets him run from the I formation, like you said, 7 yards deep, and just use him as a sledgehammer, I think he can be one of the better rookie runners, but he's just not going to give you a whole bunch in the passing game. That's always going to be the big thing, or one of the biggest negatives on this scouting report.
Yeah, so to bring things back to Travion, by the way, I agree with what you said there on Braylon, is Travion also we haven't seen a lot in the passing game other than like the occasional dump off or screen, right? So the question for a lot of these guys is going to be, how much do you see them in like designed, we dial this up for you, passing game opportunities? I think that's a developmental skill. Like, I think we've seen that the second time I've referenced him just in this conversation, but like, I think Isaiah Pacheco's come a long way as a receiver in a hurry for the Chiefs. But we just haven't seen a ton of that with Travion, who did have the injuries earlier this season and occasionally has like a bit of a robotic feel to him as a runner. But I mean, the guy rarely does not get what is blocked for him. He is a decisive and powerful guy for a dude who, not real big in terms of height, but has sort of a boxy build to him. I don't think any of these guys is a top probably 40 player on my board right now, Jordan. I mean, maybe if Jonathan Brooks was fully healthy, I'd feel differently, but I'd be surprised if any of these backs ends up going in the first round, in part because we're going to have a bunch of wide receivers. And this was my favorite position to grade in this year's class, and take a look at Marvin Harrison, number 1, Keon Coleman at Florida State, number 2, Malik Neighbors, number 3, Rome Odunze, number 4, Ladd McConkey, number 5. You might have about 10 questions at this position group, Jordan. What stood out the most, though?
2, 3, 4. We're going to talk about it all the way up to the draft, right? What do you want? That tier under Marvin Harrison Jr. is really fascinating to me, and it really just depends on what type of receiver that you like, and they're all different. Keon Coleman's that big body wide receiver that can go up and get the ball, can climb the ladder. Tremendous. Go up and get it type of receiver. He's dominant at the catch point. Neighbors is your more explosive type of player that you can use all over. And then Rome Odunze is that polished, just everything he does is just so well-rounded with his game. So what kind of helped you land with Keon Coleman at that number 2 spot as opposed to the other 2? So
I think in the NFL, in general, the league is going to default towards bigger, faster, stronger when it's close for guys, right? So I am making my own rankings because this is, if I were an NFL GM, which of course I am not, but I also am mindful of the idea of I'm trying to be mindful of how the NFL will see these players as well. So for Keon Coleman, what I can't do is place him in the offense that Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze plays in, but I do wonder what he would look like in a different offense. Not that Jordan Travis was not incredible this season. I mean, he was so great, and such a bummer to see him no longer able to play because of the injury recently suffered. But Washington, I mean, it's like Rome Odunze walks out of bed. Like, he walks onto the field, and it's like 5 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown is pretty much a guarantee. Malik Neighbors, same deal. We only have 46 catches so far for Keon Coleman, and 11 of them are gone for touchdowns. That's almost 25%. Like, that's astonishing. I don't think any player's highlight reel is going to be better this year than Keon Coleman's. Like, if you went to YouTube and just watched these guys in terms of YouTube scouting clips, you mentioned it, like climbing the ladder, the consistent ability to win 50-50 balls. But I know this is going to sound super ridiculous and just like too reductive to describe wide receivers, but the primary job of the wide receiver is 2 things: get open and catch the football. And where Keon Coleman is so unique is, despite the fact that he's 6'4" and 220 or so pounds, is that he's not only winning in contested catch situations, he's generating consistent separation. And it's not just like reaching the top of his route and pushing off of a defender with this forearm and creating separation borderline illegally, right? I mean, the foot quickness is off the charts. And I don't want to do this. I hate to make this sound unkind to the other player, but Florida State's got another receiver, Johnny Wilson, who's 6'7" and probably 200 and some pounds. And Johnny, I think, will end up, he'll find his way into the NFL, whether it's a later round pick or whatever it ends up being. And when you watch him and Keon run routes at the same time on the same side of the field, Jordan, it's like you see how different the speed is for Keon Coleman. So that's why I landed on number 2 for him. And Malik Neighbors, one of my favorite players to study in the entire draft. But it felt really, really nasty to not have Rome Odunze as wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. I think that you kind of mentioned how each one of them is different and unique. Like, Rome Odunze feels like the most well-rounded. He's like kind of in the middle, right? Like the best combination of size, speed, route running, instincts. His chemistry with Michael Penix is off the charts. And that's a Michael Penix thing, but I also think it's a Rome Odunze football IQ thing, right? Like he is just consistently in the right spot and just knows how to win a man coverage down the field, not down the field. He is so good at everything.
Runs routes in his sleep.
The guy's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Malik Neighbors, though, I just have this soft spot for a guy who just glides. I know you've made the DJ Moore comparison. I've seen the Stephon Diggs comparison myself. It's that, he's not the biggest guy by any stretch. But, man, this dude, this joker against Alabama is getting open on every play, it feels like. And Alabama's got, 2 likely, definitely drafted cornerbacks, maybe 2 first-round picks, maybe in the top 20 picks with Terrion Arnold and also Kool-Aid McKinstry. And it's like, he's open every play. One of the first plays of the game, he's a 60-yard bomb with nobody within 20 feet of him. And just the consistent ability to get open. I don't know that anybody that I've studied so far sees soft spots in zones quite like Malik Neighbors does. He just knows exactly where he has to be, exactly where he has to settle. And once he does, his run after catch is awesome as well. For a guy he's not yoked up. He just runs right past guys.
It sounds like you're falling in love with Neighbors on the podcast.
Yeah, it is. As I keep talking to people around the league, telling people sort of like where I'm at on guys, I come back to this conclusion though. My big board's not done yet, but I've started working on my big board. I think my first top 25 is going to come out at some point in early January, Jordan. All 4 of those guys be in the top 15. Right?
Oh,
so,
easy. Yeah.
You're splitting hairs here, right? Like the difference between my 3rd and 4th offensive tackle might be like, 7, 8, 9 spots in the overall big board. It might be like this. It might be Marvin might be, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the big board. You might have, in some order, right now it's Keon Coleman and then Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze. It might be 7, 8, 9 on the big board. That's how close it is between these guys. I'm not trying to take myself off the hook in terms of ranking them. You have to. But I have landed on Keon Coleman for right now with those 2 guys very much nipping on his heels. Let's go from wide receiver, though. We can talk about this for the entire time here to tight end. I'm sorry, not tight end, because I don't think anything really stands out at tight end. It's a fairly, I would say, vanilla position right now. Yeah. A lot of people agree it's Brock Bowers and the rest. But beyond wide receiver, probably the deepest position in the class is offensive tackle. So I'll read my 5 in order, and you tell me what stood out. Olu Fashanu, Penn State. Joe Alt, Notre Dame. J.C. Latham, right tackle from Alabama. Jordan Morgan, a left tackle from Arizona. And Amarius Mims, big Amarius Mims, the right tackle from Georgia. What piques your interest there?
Got to push Mims up, man.
I know, it's hard not to. He's coming on like a freight train, huh?
If he goes out and dominates against Alabama, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a top 10 pick and he's the 3rd tackle off of the board. I think he's that supremely gifted. Like, just watching his tape against Georgia Tech this past week, you'd have never guessed that he had surgery 3 weeks ago. Like, he was that good. And he's every bit of 6'7", 340 pounds. And he's not the athlete that Olu is, but I think his upside is even more. I think his upside is even more than Joe Alt. And Joe Alt's kind of that high floor guy that, I compared him to Jake Matthews. Like, he's very similar to Jake Matthews, a guy that you can just plug and play on the left side for 10 years and not worry about it. But with Mims, I think he can reach that upper tier of offensive tackles in the NFL just because of the athleticism. And you got to think, this guy hasn't even started a full season yet. And his first action was the last 2 games in the college football playoff. He goes out, he plays the first 3 games of the year. And I think he misses 5 or 6 games or so with a tightrope surgery. And then he comes back like nothing ever happened. So, he's probably going to end up being in my top 12 when my big board comes out, and he's my offensive tackle 3 behind Olu and Joe Alt, excuse me. But Jordan Morgan, he's one that has really piqued my interest as well. Why'd you have him at 4? Just curious.
So just a one quick Amarius Mims retort. He's a J.J. McCarthy of offensive linemen. right? Like
Yeah.
he's got the most to gain over the next. Again, I also think Georgia will be playing at least 3 more games, or will be playing 3 more games this year. I think it could be a Michigan Georgia college football national championship. Jordan Morgan. I'm so impressed by the way that this guy's come back from an ACL tear. Tore his ACL late last season, and you would have thought, you know what? Is he even going to be himself at the beginning of the year? And it looked exactly himself from the beginning of the season for this unbelievable turnaround season for Arizona. They absolutely love getting Jordan Morgan out in space. They run a ton of wide receiver screens where Jordan Morgan is out there hitting somebody on the second or third level, Jordan, which speaks to a handful of things. He's got really good athletic ability. He's got really good body control and like discipline, right? It's easy for these big guys to get out there in space and just throw their body around like they're a battering ram. He does it with control and discipline. That's hard to do for a man of his size. A ton of experience. He's seen some big game competition this year. And I think for the most part, held his own against guys that, certainly you've got a handful of Pac-12 rushers that will be drafted in the top 50 or 60 picks. In the case of a couple of them, they'll be first-round picks at least, and more than held his own. I think he just does everything well. Good athleticism, really good feet to be reactive as a sort of a match and mirror offensive tackle when he is dropping back to pass. It's kind of a lost art in college football because so many of these teams are, as we talked about earlier, it's like so many of them just playing shotgun that like not too many offensive tackles are getting, 12 to 15 reps a game where they're having to actually pass sets and, getting like a hard rush from the edge. But I've seen enough of that from him that he can really match and mirror. And I think he's a day one starter at a really important spot, which is also going to be part of the calculation for him versus Amarius Mims, is that one's a left tackle, one's a right tackle.
And that's kind of the weird thing about this offensive tackle class. You have your 2 left tackles at the top, and then there's a mixture of 1 left tackle and then a bunch of right tackles. Talise Fuaga from Oregon State is another name. Some others in this tackle class, of course. We already talked about Amarius Mims, who's a right tackle. Jordan Morgan plays a mixture, but Morgan reminds me a lot of Elijah Vera Tucker when he was coming out of USC. And if you remember, he played some guard, he played some tackle, and there was some questions of whether he was a guard or a tackle. And I think that's something you're going to hear about Jordan Morgan. We'll see how he does at the Senior Bowl. It's going to be really big for him. But I'm with you. Like, I think he can play guard, he can play tackle. I would let him try tackle first just because it's such a premium position. Yeah. You want to let him fail at tackle. Everybody asks, is he a guard or is he a tackle when we're talking about offensive line prospects? I'm always going to let a guy fail at tackle first just because it's such a premium position, and then I'm going to try to kick him inside just because tackle is such a premium position. But when you find that guy and he ends up being that answer at the position, now you're really happy about that. But if he doesn't hold up at tackle, let's say, I think he can slide him in at guard, and I think he'll be just fine.
Yeah, let's rip through a couple more spots there. I do think Jordan Morgan, though, is a left tackle. I feel pretty confident in that one, at least to start. Let's talk edge rushers right now. And there are 5 on the list. Dallas Turner from Alabama, my highest rated defensive prospect in the entire class. Laiatu Latu from UCLA. Chop Robinson from Penn State. Jared Verse from Florida State. And then a guy I love, Braylon Trice, who's sort of like the Mr. Dirty Work, just gets the job done. What sticks out there to you?
Chop Robinson over Verse. No. We definitely have to talk about that. I'm a big Chop guy, but I have Verse still ahead of him. Does the weight concern you with Chop? I know they list him at 250, but I would be surprised if he weighs that at the combine.
He's soaking wet, wearing a 20-pound weight vest is what he is. He's going to be one of those players that's going to have more divisive opinions than most in the class. So the positives for those that haven't seen Chop Robinson play is he's the twitchiest athlete of any of these edge rushers. His get-off is elite. We're talking about a guy who knows the count better than the offensive tackles that he is lining up against. Nobody can bend the edge like Chop Robinson. The downside is that, as you mentioned, he's thin, right? The downside for a player like this, and not to make is not to always just like go to the worst case scenario, but like you have a guy like Aaron Curry, right? The former Wake Forest star, goes top 5 overall, and just like the frame just doesn't allow him to become elite. Chop Robinson is going to have to answer to that. He's also going to have to answer to the fact that 3.5 sacks this season, 2 of which came against against UMass. He plays for Penn State, of course. So this is a traits-based evaluation, is that I am grading Chop Robinson on like the highest percentile, like what is the best possible outcome for him? And that's a guy who has Josh Sweat's, he's not quite as big as Hassan Reddick, but like that kind of pure pass rusher gets to rush the passer a ton and consistently churn out 10 to 12 sacks per season type of player. Jared Verse, I mean, he's much safer player, right? I mean, long-levered, so powerful in line, so experienced now. I don't think nearly as explosive as Chop Robinson coming off the edge. Chop's got a little bit more of an arsenal of pass rush moves than Jared Verse. Verse is going to be 23 when the draft takes place. Somebody will one day explain to me how Jared Verse not only went so under-recruited that he ended up at Albany, but also that he had to redshirt at Albany his true freshman year. But I do love, Jared Verse has answered the call in big games this year for Florida State, starting with that opening week win over LSU.
I mean, I think you're spot on as far as with Chop. He's super explosive. That second half against, I believe it was Iowa, of where he just took over. That was
against
one
of
the best games I've seen. Yeah, against a very good offensive line. The thing that worries me about Chop is we've seen these types in the past go in the first round, and Kayvon Chason is one name that comes to mind. Now, I think that's a low-end comp for him. High-end comp, I don't really have a name that I like, but obviously you want him to be better than what Chason has been. But it just, the defenders that we've seen at this size that really their game predicates around explosiveness and their sack artists, what you want to do with them is that they have to go to a team that has a rotation of rushers just because you want them to kind of be like a relief pitcher. What happened with Jacksonville and Chason is that he had to go in, he had to be a starter. You don't want him to be that just because he's winded and he's not really able to roll out his fastball all the time, which is his pass rush prowess. So I think the key for Chop is that he goes somewhere that has some experienced rushers that rotate a lot. But, I mean, I like Chop. I just have some concerns as far as landing spot. We won't know that landing spot until the draft. I just think he has to go to a great situation that really can use him as what I like to call a DPR, a designated pass rusher, just because that's his fastball. You don't want him defender to run. I think he's a fine run defender, but you don't want him doing that consistently. You want this dude getting up the field right now, whether it's on third down or those NASCAR packages that I like to call it, or where they just get all the fast guys on the field just because he's so explosive. And that's what Penn State has. Adisa Isaac is another name that'll probably go second, third round. That's a really good player, but you want Chop being paired with that big base end edge rusher, but you want him coming in third. You want him coming in the game on third downs primarily early on in his career, and then you just kind of slow feed him more reps as his career continues on.
Yeah, I mean, the high end outcome. Like I mentioned the name Josh Sweat. Who I want people to say that respectfully. Like that's a big time player right there, Josh Sweat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now he is benefiting from, as you mentioned, he plays in a rotation, right? Philly is outstanding on offense. They do have a lot of rush opportunities, right? Like that's part of it as well. Greg Russo's bigger here than Chop for sure, but Greg's kind of had a flourishing season and a half, and he's a guy that has some real juice off the edge as well. But it's a fair point. It's Chop going to San Francisco would just break the league. Right, he just had 15. He'd have 15 sacks to replace Chase Young and just go absolutely nuts. But I really like the player. Let's wrap up in terms of the top five here with safety. I'm guessing this will be a fairly succinct conversation. But Cooper DeJean, number one. Cameron Kitchens from Miami, number two. Tyler Nubin, Minnesota. Kalen Bullock, USC, and then Javon Bullard from Georgia, one of the playmakers at the bottom, number five. Anything right there that you say to yourself, "What are you doing here, Phil? What are you doing? Come on now." Give me the goods.
No, I'm just glad you're on team Cooper DeJean is a safety. I'm trying to get Matt to convert him over from corner to safety just so we can use him more.
I know.
Why are we going to waste him at corner like Iowa's doing? Let's play him in the slot. Let's play him at corner, and let's play him at safety.
Yeah, he'll play everywhere. And I was trying to think of I think the floor for, and I respect this player a lot, so I hope that people don't take it the wrong way for Cooper DeJean is Mike Hilton from the Bengals, right? Just plus slot defender, top five blitzer amongst defensive back, probably top three blitzer amongst defensive backs in the NFL. Is tough as all get out. He can set the edge for you on occasion. Love Mike Hilton. That's the floor. The ceiling is I don't even know what the ceiling is for Cooper DeJean. Worth noting, of course, that he recently suffered a leg injury that's got him out for the rest of this season. At the time that we're having this conversation, and as you know, college football injury reporting is non-existent. And not that the NFL is great, but, you don't have to say anything about these players. You just have to say they're out or they're in. I know very little about the nature of Cooper DeJean's injury, but so far I haven't heard anything that has indicated, and I could be wrong here, that this is a full year injury that's going to compromise his ability to be available for the start of training camp or something. If that happened, it obviously changes the complexion a little bit here. But I got to be honest with you, that gap between him and Cam Kinchins, still pretty sizable, Jordan. And I like Cam a lot, but that just tells you how special Cooper DeJean is. Like, he's in the conversation for best defensive players in this class.
Yeah, I mean, and then we didn't even mention the fact that he's a great return specialist too. So that's another feather in his cap that he has on his draft profile. But I love Cooper DeJean. He's one of my favorites in this entire draft class. And I got a chance to see Kitchens against North Carolina this year. He's not – so he doesn't have a lot of length. And this is a comparison that I kind of use. I don't think he's as good of a hitter.
Okay.
But do you remember Carl Joseph when he was coming out of West Virginia?
He's still Still
he's kind of similar.
Right.
Yeah, he's kind of similar to Carl Joseph. I don't think he's as violent of a hitter as what Joseph was, but he's more dependable in pass coverage too. And the name of the game is getting turnovers. Like, he's an outstanding free safety, and he could turn the ball over and get the ball back for you. I think he has over 5 interceptions this year already. So he's one player that I like a lot. But one player I definitely do want to discuss, just because I think there's going to be some discourse as we get close to the draft, is Kalen Bullock.
Him and Mel and I see this player very differently. You started off, and I'll round it out because I'm evidently a lot more bullish on Bullock.
I am too. I just wasn't a huge fan of him. Yeah, he's dead. I just wasn't a huge fan of Bullock on tape. Now, the pass coverage is great. He's an outstanding free safety. I think he has even better movement skills than what Cam Kitchens does. Like, the range is great, but when he has to come down and tackle, he's just really, really slight already as far as his frame, and then he just doesn't bring a lot of hitting power behind it as well. So his tackle percentages are very low. And then there's situations of where, how can I count on him to be my last line of defense when he's just very inconsistent with coming downhill? And we don't have to talk about USC's defense. We know they're very bad there, and a lot of it isn't his fault. I'm not blaming everything on him, but when he has to come downhill and tackle, he's just very inconsistent with doing that.
No question about it. Here are the pluses. Rare range. I mean, we're talking, no one's Ed Reid, but this guy has got rare range. He's the best center fielder that I've watched so far this season in college football. I mean,
like
the ball's
Jesse
in the
Bates,
air.
Jesse Bates type range.
Yeah, and this dude, he's turning the football over. He's getting hands on the ball. He is going to make a play if the ball's thrown in this area. He's instinctive. Like, even if the ball's not thrown in his area, he's going to find a way to it in the back end. That takes a very specific type of team that needs that. So, like, the upper end outcome would be kind of like Marcus Williams, right? A guy now in Baltimore who's like a true center fielder, right? But with Bullock, there are going to be teams that are totally turned off from him, that might have him safety 10 as opposed to safety 4 like I did. I'm acknowledging that. I just think that in the right spot, that is an insanely, insanely valuable player because he puts an umbrella on everything for your defense. But he's an ankle biter as a tackler. I mean, I would say not only I don't think he's particularly interested. I mean, I was watching your guy, Kamari Lassiter, recently this morning, and talk about a guy who wants the smoke, right?
Physical.
He's coming up there in every play. Even Javon Bullard. I mean, he's Bullard has probably has to be a little more measured and patient from time to time. He's kind of a hit or miss player. He's either gonna come up from 20 yards and break up a wide receiver screen, or he's going to come up from 20 yards and run right past the running back who has the ball in open space. But he wants it, right? Bullock doesn't want it. He's an ankle biter's tackle right now, but so much range and so gifted in the back end that the right scheme and the right team is going to fall in love with Kalen Bullock.
Yeah, I think you're spot on as far as him being scheme specific. If he can go to a team, particularly that plays cover 3 or cover 1, that just allows him to be a patrol cop, that I like to call it, on the roof of defense, he'll be just fine. But at some point, you're going to have to come downhill and tackle. That's just the nature of the game. That's just what really worries me about him. No doubt. That's by far, there was a time at the beginning of the process where I'm studying him, and a lot of the early reps that I see are just pass coverage stuff. And I'm like, God, this guy, how is this guy not talked about as like a top 25 player in the class? And you watch a little bit more, and some of the signs start to appear that are a little bit disconcerting. But I think there are going to be some fans, not in the first round, but maybe closer to the end of round 2. Yes. We have championship weekend upon us. Is there anybody, a player or two, that you're keeping your eye on this weekend that you think has a chance to show you something one way or the other? Well, we talked about them both already, and they're matched up against each other. It's Amarius Mims versus Dallas Turner. I am fascinated by seeing both of these guys. And Turner has kind of really turned it on here as of late, and he's gotten better every single year. I still think he's super raw as a pass rusher. You still like to see him use his hands a little bit more than what he does, but he's been very experimental with his hands and his rush moves this year. And we'll see how much they do end up matching up against each other. But I'm looking forward to seeing that Amarius Mims versus Dallas Turner matchup in the SEC title game.
And Chris Braswell, by the way, I was going to pick,
great player.
I'll pivot from here. But Chris Braswell, who has he's just like solid, right? Like I don't know that there is nearly as much upside. I mean, there's definitely not nearly as much upside as Dallas Turner. But Chris Braswell is going to play in the league for 6, 7, 8 years because he's going to do everything right. He's going to set a nasty edge, right? Like him and Jack Sawyer are the two guys that like you probably wish there was a bit more pass rushing acumen. Jack Sawyer, of course, at Ohio State. We'll see whether he declares or not. But those dudes, like, good luck running against him because they're going to either bring you down or force you back inside, which is an important trait. I can just imagine. I've never heard him speak about him. I bet Nick Saban loved Chris Braswell. I bet he loves him.
Without question.
Right? Like he just does all the right things, is constantly in the right spot, doesn't run past the quarterback and allow him to get upfield. But he also isn't going to be a 10-sack guy in the NFL, right? It's going to be like situational sacker. It's going to be a guy who's going to play a ton on rundowns. But this would be a great test on Saturday against Amarius Mims. Friday night, like I would just say that any player on defense for Washington or Oregon will have my attention just because the two offenses they are facing are so incredibly ridiculous. I mean, on Washington, it's, Braylon Trice, a guy that I mentioned, who I just happen to think the world of. I think that the testing will really determine where Braylon Trice ends up going in the draft because he's not like a twitchy 6'3", 245-pound obvious edge rusher, probably a little heavier
powerful
than that.
Powerful hands, man.
But his
powerful.
Hands
are so powerful. Yeah.
I don't think anybody likes to hit on every single down as much as Braylon Trice does. He just wants to initiate contact on every play, and if you give him any crack to run through, he's going to run right through you. The sack production doesn't always translate for players in that regard, but the pressure and disruption production, I think, truly does. So can't wait to watch that game on Friday night on the ESPN airwaves, by the way, on ABC on Friday night. So fired up for that one. Probably clinches, or I should say it will clinch a playoff spot for one of those two teams. I would think. That would be a stunner if not, right? I'm not Heather Dinich, but I'm pretty sure that would clinch the playoff spot for one of them. I think I survived. I do okay. You can grade it. You can be honest. No one's listening now anymore. Did okay? You didn't want to scare me too bad?
No, not too bad. I'm not a hard grader, I promise.
Oh man, I was feeling good for myself, but then you told me you weren't a hard grader. But if you haven't already, go check out the full list. What comes next from your portfolio? You've got the quarterback hot board, which should be out again sometime soon. Anything else coming down the pike for you?
So me, Matt, and then also Steve Munch, we're releasing some players to keep an eye on in the conference title games. So that will be out Thursday morning. And then in a couple weeks, I'll be releasing my top 50 big board. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
wow. Really
How many
excited.
quarterbacks in the top 50 right now, assuming Shedeur and Carson Beck are not included?
Not included. So I have the obvious two at the top. Jaden Daniels is on there. Michael Penix is on there. I did not. Bo Nix did not make it.
Dude,
so Oregon fans, don't be too hard on me, but
I know
that's an interesting little tier right there. The Penix, Nix, and then also some other JJ McCarthy. That tier under the top two is really, really interesting.
We're pressed on time here, but just a reminder, people, more than any position in sports, quarterback it's like going to the ice cream shop. What flavor do you prefer the most, right? Like, so much of it's going to be the connection you have with JJ or Bo or Michael or any of these guys during the pre-draft process. How do they handle the interviews? How do they handle interactions? How do they handle pressure situations? All those things are so important to the pre-draft process and the evaluation for quarterbacks specifically. He is Jordan Reid. Go find him on Twitter at Jordan_Reid. That is Reid, Reid. He has great information all the time pertaining to the draft. Should be a fun weekend of college football here, Jordan, plus a busy week in college football with the transfer portal flying fast and furious. Thank you for taking it relatively easy on me. And we'll be back on First Draft at some point here in the next couple of weeks.